lots of little puppies show their insecurity differently. And as they get a little bit older, their kind of hormones and maturity and things that, so if I show a puppy little might just be kind of reserved or even a little bit avoidant, but not bark. And as they get older, they get a little more like, hey, assertive, and so aggression, or somebody does things like that taps that side of them. The other thing is dogs go through little different developmental periods, and it's different for every dog, it's different for every breed. These are really hard to define, but there are dogs that are going along perfectly, everything looks great, they look super happy, outgoing, and then they go through this period where they're scared of everything. And then if we go along and we just kind of stay the course and do our training stuff the way we should, they come out on the other side and they're all better again, and it goes away completely, and you're totally fine. And they call these fear periods, and some dogs experience them and others don't. They use a lot of the behaviorists, the Scott and Fuller studies, they tried to define those fear periods. So they say there's one at 8 weeks, there's one at 6 months, there's like these things. But I find that not necessarily to be the case, right? So some dog may be super fearful at 9 or 10 weeks, and then again at 6 or 7 months, and some other dog may not ever go through those. Some dogs seem super fearful when they're little, and then it just goes away forever. Other dogs look perfect until they're a year old, and all of a sudden they have this weird thing. And part of it has to be the environment. There are experiences that the dogs are having that we're not aware of all the time. Again, remember, behavior and personality is always an interplay of genetics and environment. And those things are always going on. Every moment of every day, your dog is learning things about its environment. And so there's going to be a whole host of experiences that we're not aware of the dog having. And so that makes it saying like, hey, is this a fear period just for the dog? Is the dog just getting a little weird here, and are they going to grow out of it? Or was it this experience strictly that triggered it?
That's such an important part, is that this is the other dangerous part about getting too deep into this kind of stuff, right? Is like, is it truly this just like the dog is going through a fear period and like there's nothing you can do about it, right? And it's just the dog's genetics at play, and you have to figure out a way to work with those genetics at play? Or is it actually an issue where it's like that thing happened, right? And this is the trap people can fall into, is they can go too far and that something happened, right? And, oh, well, he was in a fear period and somebody was outside playing wiffle ball and swung the wiffle bat too close to the puppy, and that's why they're scared of men, right? Or, you know what I mean? Like, like you could get way too far down that rabbit hole with things, as opposed to understanding these stages the dog's going through are natural, and these things could be contributed to nothing or something just the dog is perceiving that you're not even aware of, like you just said, right? Obviously, environmental, the dog is learning so much about their environment on a day-to-day basis where you're not even aware of those little things. And again, you have to just figure out how to work through that. So instead of creating this, gets back to the excuse of it was this thing that happened that ruined my dog and made my dog worse, right? This is a natural progression of where my dog's going to go through, and we just have to train the dog that's in front of us, right? Yep. If our dog is now 15 months old, right, a year and a half old, whatever it may be, and is terrified of men and gets reactive to men, we just have to solve that problem right now, right? We have to train past that problem, right? Yep. And we can't hold them back by saying this thing caused it, so now we can't train through it because it's hardwired into them. It happened in the fear period. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Dog at home, when you go to work, things like that, stuff happens. You know, if your dog's in the yard or your dog's somewhere like that, you know, God knows your kid walks down the fence, dragging a stick along the fence, bang it. You don't know that happened. Who knows, right? Those kinds of things happen all the time. So that's not an exact science. What I would say is, like, having that stuff happen sucks. It happens. But our prescription is going to be the same. Our prescription is going to be to get the dog out around as many people that aren't going to do that to them as possible, and kind of rearrange their brain about new experiences, dogs, people, whatever. And we want them to think that being around those things is good. Lots of good stuff happens. Counter conditioning, our classic counter conditioning stuff. And the more you do that, the better off you're going to be. Now, if they have bad experiences in those places, they're a setback. That's why we want to kind of avoid the bad experiences, letting the dog explode and having somebody else yank their dog away and drag it off, somebody else coming at your dog or barking at your dog. People love to kind of go stomp their feet at dogs and stuff like that, like they think they're playing.
People do. I've had that happen enough times. Or people walk by, right, and they'll look at the dog and they'll go, woof.
I know. I hate that shit. It's so dumb.
What the fuck are you doing? Right? I've had that happen so many times where a car drives by real fast, and I'll literally see somebody hanging out the window going, woof, 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 woof. And it's like, bro,
Yes.
what is going through your brain when you're doing that? Like, what is, like, actually, I want to know, what is the thought happening in your head when you decide to hang out of a car window and bark at a dog on the street?
I don't know, man.
It baffles me.
Yeah.
Right? So he's getting to, we have to kind of rearrange their brain a little bit, right? And we need to get them to a place where they start seeing these things as not scary. Yeah. Now, in some cases, when you have dogs that have developed really intense fear-based responses, right? This is where we get to the balanced training approach of how I like to work through these things. Sometimes, if you're following a solely force-free approach of counter-conditioning things, right? Again, you're going into things with the expectation that we're going to make the dog love everything. Right? And you could fall into this dangerous trap of, if you run into another scenario that the dog perceives as scary, that it's another setback that you have, right? Where I choose to, again, stop some of those problematic behaviors, right? And make sure we're creating some inhibitions for those responses that the dog is having, in addition to creating more positive association, so they could start to see these things as a positive without the fallback of, if the dog then cycles back and starts reacting and rehearsing that self-reinforcing behavior, that it's going to make everything bad again.
Yeah.
Right? So...
They freak the dog out completely, right? Those are all bad things with dogs that are edgy. And you can't rely on the general public to read signs well. So that means you got to be kind of a step ahead of that stuff, right? But I would say for any puppy that's exhibiting like territorial barking, barking at strangers, barking at other dogs, barking at noises in the night, it's not that the barking is bad. It's that it's a symptom of them being unsure and nervous about these things. And so that's telling me that this dog's natural response to something that makes it nervous is partially aggressive. So instead of running and hiding under the bed, they're barking. Same impulse, same underlying cause. Response is different.
The fight or flight response, right? Some dogs are, they talk about with people sometimes, right, that you have 3 different responses to things, right? So you have fight, flight, or freeze, right? And they talk about how those are kind of genetically wired into you at birth on what your response is going to be to those things. Yeah. And what he's implying here is that it's the same with puppies, right? Every puppy genetically is hardwired to respond a different way when they're being fearful of stuff, right? Or they're scared of things. And you're just going to start to see it become more predominant, right? Or more exposed as the dog goes through these fear periods or this maturity cycle, where you're going to become more aware of that response then at that point.
Right? So my golden retriever very rarely does that as a response to those things. It doesn't usually get out at the end of the leash, hackle up, and start barking at something. It's just not their thing. Not that there aren't Goldens out there that do, but that's not a common response for them. They would more likely avoid. They would act submissive. They would try to run the other way. They would say, "Ooh, God, scary dog," and they'd go the other direction instead. Right? But it's all coming from the same place. And so that's something you file for yourself. You say, my dog's response to stress is a slightly aggressive response. So that means that down the road, if I'm not careful, that dog's response to being stressed in some way could be biting somebody or another dog, right? And so now my job is to try to address the underlying causes of that and make the dog more confident so they don't feel they have to go there. It still doesn't mean that they're not going to bite when they feel stressed. It just means it's going to be harder. If we do our jobs right, it's going to be much harder to make them feel stressed in normal everyday circumstances. And that's what we want to avoid. Normal everyday things should not make you feel stressed. Somebody walking by you on the sidewalk, another dog walking past in the parking lot, those things are not things that you should be worried about. And generally, if your dog isn't crazy fearful, then we can, in your puppies, like all of these dogs are, then you can make huge strides on that just by good, proper socialization and making sure that you're doing your counter conditioning work correctly in general. Like a lot of those initial behaviors are always going to be when it first approaches too. So one of the best things you can do is when somebody comes into your house or when you go someplace with a dog is, like if you and I were to meet on the street and we were doing it as a training op for your dog, I would come up and I would talk to you and I would completely ignore your dog. Right? I would walk straight up and I'd say, "Hey man, how's it going?" And I would have a chat with you and I would not look at the dog, I wouldn't touch the dog, I wouldn't do anything. And that means the dog can be there like, who's this guy? I don't respond, nothing happens, I don't go away.
So I told you today, Kate and I have been watching a lot of Caesar, right? We've been watching a lot of The Dog Whisperer. It's on, by the way, guys, it's on Disney Plus on the Nat Geo section. Seasons 4 through 9 are on there. Wild show, man. Those early 2000s.
Yeah.
They didn't hold back. It was raw, right? Whatever. And we're talking about it, and I still say to this day, right? I think some of the biggest things that Caesar has done for the dog world as a whole, right? One of the biggest ones, right, is this philosophy of no touch, no talk, no eye contact, right? He says it all the time, right? Mm-hmm. He says everybody's go-to when they go and meet a freaking dog is to just smother it with attention and just invade their space and just do all of these, like, he calls them dominant things to the dog, right? Yep. He said the most calm, assertive thing you could do to a dog and the best way you could get them to see you as a authority figure is to enforce no touch, no talk, no eye contact with them, right? And, as we've been watching this show and I've been seeing him talk about it more and more and more, it's like, it just like ignites things that you already know in your day-to-day, right? Mm-hmm. We talk about, like, when we introduce our dog to strangers in the house, right? We talk about always having a routine of having the dog hold a bedstay for 10 minutes before you let them interact with people. Mm-hmm. Now, why do we do that? It's for the same reason. It's to create our own version of no touch, no talk, no eye contact. Because I think it's unrealistic sometimes to just, before any guest comes over your house, teach them these ground rules with your dog and make sure they're going to enforce them. It's a lot harder for me to control my guests and the people that are coming into my home than it is for me to control my dog. Right? Yep. So no matter what, if I have my dog free and I'm trying to get everybody to just no touch, no talk, no eye contact, no touch, no talk, no eye contact with them, and the dog is like all in their space and stuff like that, inevitably somebody's going to try to interact with them and pet them, and it's going to ruin the cycle. But if I create that, you hold the bed over there, the guest comes in, because the dog's not even in proximity at this point, there is an immediate sense of no touch, no talk, no eye contact, and there's this controlled socialization from afar. This is the biggest point. Something Taylor said in the comments to somebody was, interaction is such a small part of socialization when it comes to puppies, right? Environmental socialization is everything. What is environmental socialization? Environmental socialization is your dog getting used to things in the environment, not directly impacting them so much, right? And if we could start with that, with any of these things we want to socialize our dog with, and create some degree of control of the dog not feeling the social pressure that people are putting on them constantly, literally so many problems would go away.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Every single aggressive dog that I meet that comes in for classes and stuff, if I just enforce 5 to 10 minutes of just ignoring the dog and talking to the owner, by the time I go to actually interact with the dog is cool. They're literally fine, right? And we need to start just accepting that some dogs just need just a couple freaking minutes longer. That's it.
Yep.
The dog just says, oh, well, it's not for me. But if I come up and I go, hey, nice dog, and I look at your dog and walk towards you, now all my energy is going directly at your dog.
Yep.
And your dog, a dog that's uncomfortable, is not going to like that.
Nope.
At all.
The man.
So that's generally what he's talking about, obviously, is just getting these puppies used to socializing and not seeing. So it's our job to obviously hold our dog to a little bit higher of a standard with things, right? By having training established, we could help mitigate some of those kind of close contacts. Somebody accidentally does something stupid, right? And we could still work our dog through that situation. But in addition to that, we want to be proactively making sure we're setting up scenarios like that to create more positive experiences.
Yeah.
Right?